Warm and Tender, written by Michael Jess Alexander. Amid other middle-class houses, autumn foliage, and a smoking, burnt-out Honda Accord, there stood an unassuming white stucco house. And inside of this modest house, Todd Black, middle-aged, overweight, sweaty, sat in a recliner and studied the screen of his laptop. Absorbed in a chess match that he was losing to a computer opponent, Todd jumped when a woman's scream broke the silence and his concentration. Grumbling, he moved the TV tray, holding his laptop aside, and left the comfort of his recliner to approach the boarded-up living room window. Holding the pink gossamer curtain out of the way, he peeked through the space of two boards and spotted the source of the scream. Cradling a wounded arm, a disheveled young woman in a denim jacket hurried down the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. "Somebody help me!" she yelled. Slack-jawed and breathing through his mouth, Todd observed the cemetery corpses that pursued the woman. They shambled due to the degraded state of their muscles and joints, but were carried along by a preternatural hunger that allowed them to keep pace with their living prey. Todd mentally counted the dead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "Please, someone help," the woman hollered. She kept looking back to the ghouls as she scrambled along the sidewalk. Todd glanced back at his handgun lying on the coffee table. Not worth the risk. The woman, distracted by the group at her heels, did not notice two more of the living dead step out from behind a privacy fence about a yard ahead of her. She plowed into one and tumbled with him to the sidewalk. She found herself on top of the dead man's chest with her right hand in his abdomen. Freeing her hand, she resumed screaming at the sight of the globby putrefaction covering her fingers. The still-standing zombie, female with long, matted hair and dressed in an earth-stained black dress, descended upon the woman, and while the living woman struggled to escape the dead woman's hold, the other zombies caught up. They joined in, ripping with bony hands and tearing with rotted teeth her warm, tender flesh. Todd let the curtain fall back into place and returned to his recliner. As the young woman continued to scream, he plopped down and scooched the TV tray back in place. He moved his index finger to the enter key so that he might resume his losing chess game, but let his finger hover. He glanced over to the framed picture of his wife, Kara. "You stupid woman, I told you not to leave." "He's all alone, Todd," she said in that plaintive tone that singed his nerves. "Someone will help him, Kara. You're not obligated. You're a nurse, not his daughter." He felt his words developing sharper edges. "Who will help him? He has no family, and we both know the police are no help." At the mention of the police, Todd could not help but think of his neighbor, Paul Devich. 2 days earlier, Todd had watched from inside his house as a police officer mistook the hard-of-hearing, elderly man's non-compliance at the demand that he turn around as confirmation that Mr. Devich was a zombie, and then shot him dead. "We're his only chance, Todd," Kara insisted. Todd sighed. It's not worth the risk. He sensed his fuse nearing its end. "I already told you, I'm not taking the chance. We need to stay here and wait this out. It's the best option." "Please, Todd, help me. We'll hurry and get him and come right back." She pleaded with her eyes. "He's all alone," she reminded him. Kara persisting in the face of his clear disagreement was like dripping his already lit fuse in gasoline. "Go, Kara. Go get him," he said, his words a rage-fueled staccato. but I want you to know you'll be leaving me all alone." Kara flashed him a grimace that would have been at home on the face of a grave robber discovering a rodent mother and her young nestled inside a corpse, and then turned towards the front door. Without another word, she unlocked the deadbolt and the doorknob, opened the door, and walked out into the quiet dawn, closing the door behind her. Todd, a fleshy furnace radiating hate, clenched his fists as Kara's minivan started up and sped away. A whole day had passed since Kara had left. With all wired and wireless communication not working, which Todd was certain was the doing of Everett Canyon, the defense contractor that virtually held the deed to the city and was undoubtedly responsible for the monsters that were besieging it, Todd enjoyed no easy means of contact with Kara, short of leaving his refuge and making the more than a mile trek to Harold Clemming's home, and he wasn't going to do that, especially after the carnage he'd witnessed out front. No, Todd was doing exactly what he should do. Sit tight, play it safe, and wait for Everett Cannon to send in commandos to clean up this mess. He pressed the enter key to resume his chess game. Down to his king, queen, a bishop, and a few pawns, the computer's advantage in pieces made Todd's loss a foregone conclusion. He persisted for a couple more moves, but resigned in frustration at the loss of his queen. An autumn breeze had developed, and Todd listened as it whistled through the various entry points in his old house. He couldn't tell for certain, but he thought he could still hear, mingled with the wind, the moans of the ghouls who had ended the young woman on the sidewalk. This was a lonely sound, and it accentuated Todd's sense of isolation. "I miss you, Kara, but I made the right choice, damn it. I wish you were still here, but you just had to be so stubborn. If only I could have made you see that you were throwing your life away for a relative stranger." A new sound suddenly joined the wind, the patter of raindrops on window panes. And then, as if at the direction of Mother Nature's conducting baton, thunder suddenly rounded out the ensemble. Spurred by curiosity, Todd returned to the living room window to observe the zombies. Out in the twilight rain, which had already turned into a downpour, the group that had killed the young woman earlier was now joined by their partially devoured victim, a beneficiary of whatever lab-made microbe or chemical was responsible for this whole ordeal. Seemingly heedless of the weather, the creatures did not abandon each other to dash for the nearest cover, but instead stood together in the rain like hungover sentinels. "They're like one big family," Todd thought, and then discarded the idea in disgust. "They're nothing more than automatons driven by an appetite for flesh," he decided, "and the only reason they're not doing anything now is that they haven't sent the nice morsel in the White House across the street." He returned to the recliner and grabbed his handgun from the coffee table. He hefted it and took a small pleasure in its weight and solidity. A thump on the living room window intruded on his reverie and nearly caused him to discharge the handgun by accident. Reluctantly, gun still in hand, he made his way to the window and carefully stepped over a pair of his tennis shoes that sat between him and the source of the thump. Breathing heavily, he peered through the boards and discovered who was beating on the window. It was Kara. Her bestial and degraded appearance unmanned him, and he retreated backwards in small, jerky steps. In this state of shock, he tripped over the tennis shoes he had just stepped over and tumbled violently to the floor, and this time his gun did discharge. Despite the mind-numbing pain of his wound, Todd understood the extent of his injury. The bullet, he could see, had entered the right side of his abdomen and had, the wetness of his shirt informed him, exited his lower back. He knew that he would die. Just before the dread of non-existence could fully take hold, Kara pounced again on the glass. Teeth gritted, Todd glanced in her direction. He thought of the young woman's initiation into the shambling dead. Would he actually prefer that type of existence over potential nothingness? The notion of sharing a fate with his wife and having her again at his side somewhat tempered his revulsion of the creatures outside. "I'm joining the family, Kara," he hollered as he began to shift his weight to make his way to the door. He winced, but fought through the pain, sustained by the manic determination of a man with nothing left to lose. Resting his shoulder against the wall, he unlocked the deadbolt and doorknob and swung the door open. Lightning flashed, illuminating the neighborhood for a split second. Todd rounded the doorframe until he was leaning against the exterior of the house. The rain was cold, but he knew he would not mind soon enough. "Hi, babe." Kara began to shuffle towards him. "I need you to share your gift, Kara. Come on, hun, just one little bite." Kara stretched out her arms and grasped Todd. With what was left of his diminishing strength, Todd held her face and resisted to prevent her from getting too carried away. He guided her chomping teeth to his shoulder, and with some hesitance, allowed her to sink into his flesh. He screamed at the fire in his shoulder and pushed her away. Out of the corner of his eye, Todd noticed the other ghouls advancing towards him. Already halfway across his lawn, they were quickly closing in. Not willing to part with any more of his person, Todd twisted to retreat inside. This hasty movement contorted his wound, and he collapsed in blinding agony. He pushed away the pain as best he could and began to crawl towards the entryway, but a cold hand grasped his ankle and halted his progress. It was Kara, of course, and she began to crawl up his legs. Kicking did not deter Kara, and she took a considerable chunk out of Todd's thigh. Despite his protestations, Kara continued to glutton herself. The rest of the dining party arrived, and testing deteriorated muscles and joints to crouch down, they joined in. "You're eating too much," Todd tried to howl, but the words came out in a barely audible whimper. Not that this mattered, the dead would have ignored him either way. They proceeded to bite, tear, and rip without any concern over those parts their victim most hoped to keep intact. Unfortunately for Todd, once the dead had finished, they'd left nary a cell that might contain any semblance of his consciousness. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to the author for letting me read his story. If you want more stories like this, I will link the author's book in the description. Have a good night, everyone. Love, the Mistress.